Well, the letter about the eruption of Vesuvius is obviously on the surface very much about his uncle Pliny the Elder and his heroic investigation initially of this extraordinary phenomenon. But it's also a letter which tells you something about Pliny the Younger as an author, I think. Um, and when his narrative begins, he is, I think, casting himself very much as a sort of reliable eyewitness. And there are all sorts of little details in the text which are meant to communicate that he's being reliable in the way that he's presenting this information. So, for example, quite close to the start, he gives us a date, August the 24th, about 1 in the afternoon, hora fere septima. And so he's putting markers of time, and that's something you might associate, for example, with a historical narrative, when things will happen, how events unfold relative to one another. And that comes in again, I think, right at the end of the letter. In fact, he very forcefully asserts that he's related in a faithful sort of fashion, either events that he himself witnessed, or else things that he heard about at the time. And then he reminds us that that's when you get the most reliable information. If you've had a big incident, you need to speak to people quickly, so that their own memories are not clouded by talking to other people, for example. So in this letter, I think, in spite of the move at the end, where he claims not to be writing about history, actually a lot of the details that he gives us in the account, I think, are meant to evoke the writing of history as a genre. Well, the portrait of Pliny the Elder is obviously very much at the heart of this narrative, and it's a narrative which tells you basically how he dies, and it's a piece of writing which I think accentuates his heroism as an individual. It is, of course, a very apt sort of death for a man who wrote a natural history. So he's very much living or dying his work. So you could also perhaps think of it as a miniature piece of epic writing. So, I mean, all of the spectacular details about the progress of this volcanic cloud, and the details about its shape as a sort of pine tree, for example, and other details about the ashes and cinders falling thickly and hotly around. It might make us think, for example, of Virgil Aeneid Book 2, and the narrative there of the destruction of Troy by fire. So I think what you have here is Pliny the Elder being cast rather in the manner of an epic hero, and you can focus on particular points, I think, in that setting. For example, the point that emerges again and again, it really focuses on his altruism. He's concerned about other people. He's not concerned about himself. And there's this focus on this named woman, Rectina, the wife of Bassus, who is terrified, understandably, and appeals for help because she can't get out. And in fact, as everyone else is fleeing as best they can, he's heading right into the danger. So he's not thinking of himself, he's thinking of other people. And the little snippets of direct speech, for example, when Pliny the Elder says, well, fortune helps the brave, it adds vividness, for example. You also get, I think, a focus on his mannered lack of concern for the events unfolding around him. It's a bit like a sort of stoic death scene that you get in other narratives, for example, the suicide of the Emperor Otho in Tacitus's Histories. He's comforting those around him, for example, and he is telling little white lies in order to spare people's feelings. So people are looking out on the fires, and he says they've just been left by country people who've just abandoned the villas. It's nothing really to do with the volcano. So he's trying to make other people feel better around him. And I think one very nice little detail is when he goes to sleep, has a bit of a rest in the midst of all this, which is an extraordinary thing in and of itself. And he doesn't just pretend to go to sleep, he actually does sleep, and Pliny the Younger talks about his snoring, for example. So he's really asleep, he's really recharging his batteries, and he's not perturbed by the events around him. And that detail about the snoring is also interesting because Tacitus, to whom this letter is addressed, has precisely that detail in his account of the Emperor Otho's suicide. So Otho too, the night before his suicide, is presented as snoring, as getting a very good night's sleep. So there's an interesting interaction there between what Pliny the Younger is doing in this letter and a detail which pops up elsewhere in Tacitus's account, not in the context of the eruption of Vesuvius, although who knows, he might have included it, but in the context of the suicide of Otho. So what we have here is a man who is enacting a kind of epic bravery and is embracing the death of a sort of stoic hero, and who effectively deserves the kind of immortality that Pliny the Younger talks about right at the start of the letter, that this is an apt subject for Tacitus to be writing about in a historical narrative, which itself has particular claims to being a genre which will last forever, which will hand down the accounts of brave deeds to posterity.